Yo! Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Resident Evil Retrospective. Resident Evil, or Biohazard as it's originally titled in Japan, is a series that's just about as iconic as one can be when it comes to scary video games, pioneering the genre of survival horror, spawning a franchise that consists of countless sequels, spin-offs, movies, both live action and animated, comics, toys, and through all the series' highs and lows, it has still managed, after almost 30 years, to remain relevant and a staple of video game culture and discussion. However, we're really getting way ahead of ourselves here, because today, my friends, we're going to be taking a look at the very first original that started it all, discussing what made it so iconic, if it aged like fine wine or perhaps more like spoiled milk, and above all else, its game design and mechanics that would come to define a new genre of video game, as well as the many inspirations that helped in creating what it is to this day. We'll also be taking a look at the various differences between the various versions of the original game, as well as a very detailed look at its just as iconic remake as well. So, with that said, sit back, relax, and let's walk through the halls of Spencer Mansion together. On December 15th, 1989, a new game would be released on the Japanese Famicom home console, entitled Sweet Home. Its producer, Junzo Itami, and director, Kiyoshi Kurosawa, commissioned the video game to launch alongside Kurosawa's horror film of the same name. Sweet Home the film is about a small film crew that visits the old abandoned mansion of famous artist Ichiro Mamiya, who left several precious frescoes inside his house. The team wants to restore and publish the paintings and film a documentary about Mamiya and his arts. But unfortunately for them, after they enter the mansion, paranormal events start happening, and one of the film crew, named Asuka, is possessed by the infuriated ghost of Lady Mamiya, Ichiro's wife, who kills any trespassers to her domain, and is angry because her son, Ichiro, fell into the house's incinerator one day and burned alive. Since then, Lady Mamiya's ghost haunts the mansion, and so the film crew must fight off and possibly put the spirit to rest if they intend on getting out of the mansion alive. Sweet Home the game is an RPG with the same plot, albeit you do end up encountering not just one, but many hostile ghosts and other supernatural enemies. It's up to you, as the player, to fight your way through this mansion, and try to keep your 5 playable characters, the film crew, alive, though the story will progress regardless if one of them dies or not, with there being multiple endings depending on how many you're able to save by the game's end, with the best being possible for you to have all 5 survive. Now, the reason I bring this game up is because it just so happens to be the foundation for what would become the main topic of our video today, Resident Evil. Sweet Home is a hybrid of RPG exploration and adventure game problem solving that would quietly lay the groundwork for survival horror, notably with its tight inventory limits that force trade-offs, environmental storytelling through notes/diaries and small cutscenes, and a single, intricately connected mansion to explore, emphasizing backtracking and spatial mastery. These creative choices for this game were both choices that came from platform constraints and from Fujiwara's desire to craft tension through resource scarcity, meaning that even if you're doing well in the game, it only takes one mess up to have you suddenly scrambling for resources and trying to keep it together. It's why this game is often considered the proto-survival horror game, and again, the DNA for Resident Evil. Shinji Mikami was commissioned to make a game set in a haunted mansion like Sweet Home, and early on, the game was intended to be a remake of Sweet Home. The project was proposed by Sweet Home Home creator Tokoro Fujiwara, who was Mikami's mentor and served as the game's producer. Fujiwara said, quote, "Once the PlayStation was released, conversation turned towards the idea of launching an original franchise. The basic premise was that I'd be able to do things that I wasn't able to include in Sweet Home. It was mainly on the graphics front that my frustration had been building up. I was also confident that horror games could become a genre in of themselves." Unquote. However, Capcom no longer had the rights to Sweet Home, and so they had to instead invent their own new universe and story that was simply inspired by Sweet Home. Initially, parts of the concept were considered for the Super Famicom, or Super Nintendo, but as 3D-capable consoles, again notably that of the PlayStation 1, gained ground, the team shifted direction. The promises of emerging hardware allowed more ambitious visuals and presentation. The move to PlayStation, however, brought its own constraints, such as memory, polygon count, streaming, etc. And many design decisions had to be compromises between ambition and feasibility. The development team for Resident Evil, or Biohazard, was named Team Horror internally. Many of its members were relatively inexperienced, the team mostly consisting of younger developers rather than the veteran staff. As noted before, this included its director, Shinji Mikami, who initially hated the idea of directing this game because, well, he didn't like being scared. But this was perhaps what made him the best director for the job, as he really knew what would scare people and what they would not want to experience the most. The journey from concept to final product, however, involves significant pivots in camera perspective, narrative, and gameplay systems. One of the more dramatic changes was the shift in camera perspective. Early on, the game was portrayed using a first-person view. However, the hardware and resource constraints made it difficult to maintain fluid performance and atmosphere in first person. The team also drew inspiration from Alone in the Dark, released in 1992, a pioneering horror game that used pre-rendered backgrounds and fixed camera angles. And if we're getting technical, it's probably also a proto/burst survival horror game, but it would end up being Resident Evil that would give itself that genre distinction in the end. But at any rate, Alone in the Dark influenced the decision to adopt fixed camera perspectives. Mikami later remarked that fixed cameras inadvertently contributed to the game's tension, because players would be forced to enter rooms without knowing what awaited them just out of view. The original concept was much more supernatural in nature as well. Some early designs included ghosts, curses, and other supernatural phenomenon, rather than the biochemical, viral horror that Resident Evil became known for. Initially, the game was being more influenced by Japanese horror rather than that of Western horror. But as development advanced, the team leaned more on this biological, scientific horror bend. Viruses, mutations, etc., because it felt more grounded and scalable for gameplay. This also aligned with trends in horror media of the time, which were leaning towards science gone wrong tropes, as well as being heavily inspired by George A. Romero films like Dawn of the Dead, and the mansion itself also heavily being inspired by the Overlook Hotel setting in the 1980 horror film The Shining. There was also just a lot of ideas that were thrown at the wall that never quite made it into the game. Like for a while, the game was gonna have super advanced motion capture technology for its cutscenes, before they realized that this just wouldn't be feasible in the third-person camera, at least on current hardware. At one point, the game was also gonna have a co-op mode, and the original idea was to have Chris and Jill stick together through the whole game, with the player giving commands to their AI partner via a menu. However, yet again, this was cut due to the development team not being able to get it to function well enough for the final product, though you can see some beta footage of it here in the background. Originally, the story was going to have a far more sci-fi bend as well, with Chris and Jill still being in it alongside these two other characters. Gelzer, who was this muscular cyborg who was slated to be the star's heavy weapons specialist, and Dewey, who was intended to be the character who injected humor into the game and kept the other protagonist's spirits up, apparently. Gelzer was eventually replaced by Barry Barry Burton when the team decided to abandon the project's early sci-fi elements. As for Dewey, it's believed that he was essentially replaced with Rebecca Chambers, despite the fact that they're two very different characters. But all the same, concept art does exist for the both of them, so that's still pretty cool to see. In typical survival horror fashion, Resident Evil introduced limited inventory space, item management, and puzzle solving, forcing players to make difficult choices, an example being which ammo to carry. These design constraints were meant to encourage tension, resource management, and fear of being unprepared, and all these traits being borrowed and further expanded upon from Sweet Home thankfully made it into the game, and as we'll discuss, are key to not only this game's core design, but also survival horror in general. Because the game used pre-rendered static backgrounds combined with 3D models for characters and enemies, etc., the artist had to create high-detail background images from multiple angles, and then align them with the camera transitions. This technique was resource-intensive and required careful planning to minimize perceptible seams or mismatch. The art team also placed emphasis on small details, examples being how bullet shell castings fall, ambient sound cues, and how doors creak to elevate the immersion. One Capcom staff member recalled being made leader of graphics on Resident Evil, that many environmental micro details were insisted upon. These small details were meant to give more life and realism to the game's setting. Speaking of realism, live-action full-motion video was also used for the intro and ending cutscenes of the game, all of which was filmed in Japan with a cast of American actors that, for many years, many people never knew the names of, though many of them have since come out of the woodwork to talk about their experiences with their roles and have even hosted little let's plays and whatnot together. Notably, Lynn Harris, who played Rebecca in the cutscene, was also the voice director for the game, basing her direction on making it more camp, loosely on Dawn of the Dead, The Blob, The Rocky Horror Picture Show, etc., resulting in a, well, very iconic performance to say the least. By the time the game was finished, and after much trial and tribulations, the game would launch officially on March 22nd in 1996 in Japan, April 1st of the same year for the United States and Canada, and August 16th, 1996 for the PAL regions. And according to Shinji Mikami, quote, "During the time when we were making it, my personal feeling was that Resident Evil was not a game that should be made into a series. This is because horror tends to have strong patterns that are easy to get used to, meaning they're easy to get tired of. I never thought that the game would become such a huge hit," unquote. This sentiment was shared by Capcom in general, with them not having much faith in the game selling all that well. The thought was that Resident Evil was firmly going to be an ambitious niche game that wasn't going to sell exceptionally well, and they were okay with that, this being from a very different era back when sometimes games were just made because they really wanted to make them. It was a showcase of graphics, art, and experimentation, them not always having to sell super well, but just enough to get their money back, essentially. Little did they know, could they have known, just how successful this game would end up being. But I'm getting ahead of myself again. So with that said, let's finally dive into the game proper itself. Resident Evil's story begins in July of 1998, in the outskirts of Raccoon City, a small, Midwestern town. A series of grisly murders have taken place near the Arkley Mountains, where victims appear to have been cannibalized. The Raccoon City Police Department sends in their elite Special Forces Unit, STARS, which stands for Special Tactics and Rescue Service, to investigate it. When Bravo Team goes missing, however, Alpha Team, led by Captain Albert Wesker, and including those of Chris Redfield, Jill Valentine, Barry Burton, and Joseph Frost, are dispatched to search for them. However, when Alpha Team locates the wrecked Bravo Team helicopter, they are then immediately attacked by these disgusting, very bad dogs.
Hey! Come here!
Joseph is killed, and the others flee into a nearby mansion, seeking refuge. Once inside, they quickly realize that something is terribly wrong. The mansion appears abandoned, yet filled with strange puzzles, locked doors, and evidence of violent encounters. The team splits up to explore and find their missing comrades, and depending on if you chose to play as Jill or Chris, the other one you didn't pick will be missing. It's a great setup for a mystery, and sets you forth into exploring the mansion and seeing what secrets and evils, or biohazards, lay around each of its hallways, rooms, and secret chambers. I also have to note just how cool and iconic the opening cutscene is, complete with the hokey acting, and also pretty cool special effects. Special effects that were actually heavily censored in the American release of the game, though it is pretty easy to find the fully covered, extra gory versions of the cutscenes online these days. The acting is much the same for the game cutscenes too, all of which are very campy, which is a direction that in one part is slightly intentional, and one part complete mistranslation. It being a Japanese game with a Japanese script being translated into, well, English, the mistranslation part, I suppose, becomes sort of obvious. The tongue-in-cheek part of the direction, however, was more of an attitude that the general direction was taken for how to deliver these lines, because it wasn't always clear what action was going to be taking place for any of the voice actors' lines, which results in various clips such as these.
Stop it! Don't open that door!
But Chris is...
What is it?
Maybe it's Chris. Now, Jill, can you go?
I'm going with you. Chris is our old partner, you know.
Okay, let me handle this.
What is it?
Kenneth was killed too. Maybe by this creature. Anyway, let's report this to Wesker.
What happened to Jill and Wesker?
Barry!
That was too close. You were almost a Jill sandwich.
You're right. Barry, thanks for saving my life.
Sorry, I didn't mean to do that.
You must be from the Bravo team.
Yes, I'm Rebecca Chambers. I'm a newcomer. I just joined the Stars Bravo team last month. Well, I'm really sorry. Are you all right?
Yes. I'm Chris Redfield from the Alpha team.
Richard, what happened?
Oh, Jill, this house is dangerous. There are terrible demons. Ouch!
What's going on? How come you look so scared?
Look at this. What do you think of it?
I've been thinking something is wrong with this house.
Right.
I can't believe it. Are you okay?
Yeah, so much for him. We got to the root of the problem. Saved again.
However, this doesn't at all ruin the experience. In fact, it adds quite a lot to it, especially when you have as iconic a set of characters as the first Resident Evil. As I noted a bit earlier, you'll have two different playable characters to choose from, and while I'll get into the gameplay differences between them in a moment, personality-wise, Jill Valentine is intelligent, pragmatic, and very resourceful. I'd say she's one of the more level-headed of the group, and is pretty damn good at lockpicking, as it turns out.
Here's a lockpick. It might be handy if you, the master of unlocking, take it with you.
The other playable character is Chris Redfield, and he, on the other hand, is brave, determined, and yet is also a bit of a goofball. cracking dad jokes here and there. He's kinda the strong leader soldier type, maybe a bit reckless, but overall a chill guy. If you play as Jill, then Barry will be your comrade you'll see most often, while if you're Chris, Rebecca will be the one that you see most often. Barry Burton is the family man. He's warm, trustworthy, and sort of has a fatherly nature. Again, perhaps because he's one of the only ones who has a wife and kids to go back home to. He's got a laid-back personality, but also has a sense of humor from time to time. His dynamic with Jill is like a mentor, always helping her out and getting her out of sticky situations when he's not sometimes accidentally getting her into them.
Hey, what's going on?
Now I've done it. Sorry, Jill. Wait. I'll go and get another rope.
Rebecca Chambers, on the other hand, is the youngest member of STARS at only 18, and is actually the only survivor from Bravo Team. She's a field medic, and personality-wise is compassionate, eager, and idealistic. She's a rookie thrust into this nightmare, and thus her dynamic with Chris feels like someone who's both using her abilities to help him out, but also being his biggest cheerleader as he does most of the gunslinging.
This room is fully equipped with medical supplies. I can treat you, except for your major injury. Would you like me to?
Yes, please do something for me, temporarily.
Then finally, we have the team's captain, Albert Wesker, a dude with a killer style instead of shades. He's intelligent, aloof, yet also gets straight to the point, sort of cold in that sense. You only get glimpses of him throughout the game besides the game's finale, and so much of Albert comes off as a strong leader who's sort of looking out for everyone. A real professional, but not someone you'll ever get to know nearly as well until, again, the very end of the game. Regardless of if you're playing through the game as Jill or Chris though, the group will split up and will have to start exploring the Spencer Mansion, investigating the strange happenings here, as well as finding out where the others went. It's not long before you have your first encounter with your very first zombie. As it turns out, the mansion is crawling with zombies, reanimated corpses. More than that, as you delve deeper into the mansion, you come to find evidence of biological experiments gone awry, strange keys, and deadly traps. Zombies aren't the only creatures you'll end up encountering either. Everything from deadly pus and flesh exposed dogs called Cerberuses, which you saw in the beginning cutscene, deadly crows and snakes, giant spiders, deadly plants, giant sharks, you name it. Not to mention some of the most dangerous creatures in the game, known as hunters. But we'll get to them shortly. As you progress through the story, you'll come to understand the reason these things exist is because of bioweapon experiments using a virus called the T-virus, which can reanimate dead tissue, cause cellular regeneration, and other extreme mutations which generally can also make them stronger too. Just one catch: it tends to make them extremely aggressive and cannibalistic. To what end for all of this, you may ask? Well, that's not clear from the very start, but all of these experiments gone wrong all seem to have been done under the command of the mysterious Umbrella Corporation. I'll dive more into the other elements of the story as we reach the game's end, but all the same, what we have here is a good old-fashioned mystery, filled with corporate corruption and conspiracy, trying to find out the whys and how the situation you find yourself in total isolation and paranoia, with all the traps, monsters that make each and every new door or secret passage or key that you collect full of tension and discovery, and finally, survival horror, because in the end, you must survive, help the others around you survive this, well, horror scenario, and do it all with limited ammo, health, and save items. And that, at its core, is what makes Resident Evil such a timeless classic: the gameplay. The core gameplay loop, or formula, is pretty simple. At first you'll be exploring this labyrinth of a mansion and finding your way around, mapping it out as you go, and as you do and try to go into certain doors, you'll notice they say they require certain types of keys, or that they're locked from one side or the other. You'll also start to notice items you can pick up, items that you can't use without other items. And before long, you'll be going back and forth through these halls, trying to think about what items should be used where, solving puzzles sometimes like in the case of the Crow Room, and slowly but surely making progress until through some chain of events, you find a new key item or key that now allows you to access a bunch of other new rooms with new items, keys, etc. Rinse and repeat until you've unlocked every single door in the game and solved every puzzle and find your way at the end of the game. In that sense, it's pretty easy, just some basic logic puzzles and finding what items go where. But that's what you do while you're avoiding zombies, traps, and other monsters that fill this mansion. While in a different game, that would be as easy as, well, just shooting them. You have guns after all, don't ya? The thing is, it would be, if it weren't for the fact that there are so many monsters in this mansion and very limited ammo for you to use. At the start of the game, you'll have a very basic combat knife and handgun, and while the handgun can take zombies down, the amount of shots needed to take one down can differ quite a lot. Maybe it's like 4 or 5 shots, or maybe it's damn near an entire clip of 15 bullets. And that's not counting if they fall into the ground, but still aren't quite dead yet, and need a few more bullets to finish them off. You could use your combat knife at that point, but that could also prove to be a dangerous move most of the time, since that would mean getting closer to them. And at that point, they can grapple you and take a nice chunk out of your neck. What this ultimately amounts to is a situation where even if you try and kill every zombie in your path, you will run out of bullets and be forced to have to run around them instead, which you certainly can do, but sometimes there is very tight hallways and corridors that makes avoiding them very difficult, if not near outright impossible. And that is due in large part to the fact that this game has you controlling with tank controls, which means instead of full analog control, tank controls mean that when you move the analog stick or directional buttons left or right, it simply turns your character in place. And then when you press forward on the D-pad or analog stick, they will move forward. This is again opposed to how it's done in more modern games, where you can spin the analog stick around and sort of always be moving in a fluid motion. Tank controls are far more robotic in nature. However, they are by no means bad. In fact, personally, I love them. But yes, they can take some getting used to, especially if you're more used to modern games. But given enough time, you can get really good at tank controls and sort of fly through areas without breaking a sweat. So they don't stay difficult forever. But what they do stay as forever, no matter your skill level with them, is they stay more stiff. They are more deliberate and slower than normal analog control. And this is important because it changes fundamentally how you approach every enemy encounter, as you can't as easily bob and weave past them. With tank controls, maybe sometimes you need to lure an enemy out of the way and then make a break for it past them. Maybe you end up trying any other path to avoid them. Maybe in order to save ammo, you take a zombie down and then pull your knife out and stab them while they're on the ground so that you don't have to finish them off with bullets, but then you might want to give yourself room to back up if that knife doesn't quite do it for you, which with tank controls are as simple as pressing the down button or down on the analog stick, which will have you backing up. And in future entries, you'll actually get a quick turn, which you can just quickly press the run button and press the down button and be completely spun around to run away. Here in the original game, this option is not here, so you'll have to make do with what you have. All the same, what I'm getting at is that it's all about planning for the next step while under pressure, and at some point you start to understand target prioritization, especially as you're going to be going back and forth through certain hallways a lot. Maybe instead of the 3 zombies in a hall that you normally have to bob and weave around, you end up killing one of them to make the job just that bit easier for you. Maybe you start killing the ones you know you're going to have to deal with again and again, like one right outside a save room for example, or down a high-end traffic and tight hallway, while avoiding other less important zombies that you can only find in smaller rooms that are generally out of the way. It's all part of considering how best to, well, survive the horror that's in front of you. And again, I know some people see tank controls as archaic or even bad, but they really aren't. They're just simply different, and to me, because they are slower and require more deliberate action, they do add a lot to the sense of tension, because even if you get used to them, but especially if you aren't, just a little bit of control has been taken from you that's normally there. It's just a little bit more cumbersome, a bit more deliberate, and that makes every encounter feel just that bit more tense. And then later on, when you do get used to it and start actually taking out zombies and maneuvering around them, it's quite rewarding and empowering. But survival is not just found in enemy encounters, but also with the management of your resources. Obviously, as I noted, you have a limited amount of ammo to spare, but also you have a limited amount of healing items. Should you find yourself making a mistake, do you heal yourself after a small mistake? Or do you deal with having less health now, taking a risk, but also saving on your resources? Not to mention, you have a limited amount of item slots on your person, and you'll be finding all sorts of items throughout the mansion. If you want to defend yourself, one item slot is going to have to be taken up by your gun, and another one is more than likely going to be taken up for ammo. And if you want some sort of healing item, you'll also have to take up another slot. Now, if you're playing as Jill, that means you have 5 slots left for keys, items, or maybe the extra ammo or health or weapons that you come across while exploring the mansion, which is manageable. But for Chris, those 3 items now take up half of your inventory now, meaning there's only 3 left, meaning far less wiggle room, which means either stripping back on what you might have considered bare essentials for survival and taking that risk, or keeping them and needing to run back and forth to drop off your key items in a storage unit where you can keep all your extra stuff at. And that would mean more backtracking and thus more time with the monsters overall, which is also in of itself a risk. So the entire thing is based on risk versus reward, and the item management is all part of this core gameplay loop, in discovering new rooms, fighting new monsters, getting new items, and storing or using those items to get access to more new stuff, making for a very fun game that rewards exploration and taking occasional risks, and more than anything, learning the layout of this mansion and where the dangers are within it. All this is then put in a very nice bow when even your save items are also in limited supply, with you having to save at typewriters with ink ribbons, meaning that if you save too much, you could have to go through whole stretches of the game without a save in sight, adding to the tension. Or, if you keep them stockpiled, you'll have to do that anyway, but in shorter bursts, as you try to figure out when is the best time to save the game. Have you accomplished enough? Gotten enough done to justify using a save? Or do you take the risk of doing more to save it for later? It again reinforces the same core gameplay element, from saving, to item and resource management, to enemy encounters, to exploration, to even simply movement. All of it is about deliberate action in the face of stressful situations. It's easy to fuck up when you're forced to make the choice between 2 hard choices, and thus why it is key to the genre that is survival horror and Resident Evil. This is especially true as the game throws you curveballs in the form of a new monster in the latter half of the story with hunters, these reptilian creatures that make some genuinely unnerving sounds, and unlike zombies which stand in place and slowly walk towards you, or dogs which can be fast but sort of roam around and can be somewhat easily ran around, or spiders which do attack you but also seem a bit skittish and move rather erratically. Hunters, as the name implies, hunt you. They are fast. If you try and run past them, they can swipe you with incredible reach due to their long arms, and they can pounce on you from across the room and nearly kill you instantly by taking your head off. On top of all that, in the second half of the game, many places where once there were zombies now there are hunters. This was no doubt done very deliberately, as by this point you have more than likely found a shotgun to use in the game, or possibly a grenade launcher if you're playing as Jill. And the thing is, once you find a shotgun, they can actually solve the problem of zombies pretty easily, because if you have the shotgun, you can wait for a zombie to get directly near you, aim up, and blow their head clean off in one single shot. It's conserving both ammo and also getting rid of the problem quite easily. However, unlike zombies, hunters require at least 3 shots from the shotgun, taking up that valuable ammo. But even if you have the ammo to spare, the way they fall down after being shot from adds to the difficulty, because then they will get back up and try to pounce on you, meaning that you need to time your shots just right to shoot them again just as soon as they get back up from being on the ground. Shoot too early and you will miss them entirely and give them the chance to pounce on you. Shoot too late and they, well, will probably be doing the same thing. So there is a bit of a window there when you're shooting them. It's difficult, but made even more so depending on the camera angle. Maybe you hear a hunter and so you end up aiming at it and shooting it before it can get even close to you, but can't visually see it. And so you have to sort of intuit and learn their getting back up animation and get the timing just right. It's a whole new skill to learn and really shakes up the second half of the game quite nicely. But on that note, I guess I should talk about the camera, as it's what they call fixed, meaning that every hallway, room, and general area that you go into have set fixed camera angles, and that alone does 2 things. The first thing it does gameplay wise is yet again add to the tension that we've been discussing the whole time up till now. You walk into a room and hear the sound of a zombie jumbling around, a dog panting, a spider shuffling about, or a hunter growling. And maybe you don't see it. Do you dare move forward to get a better camera angle, risking getting far closer to it than you intend to? Or do you stay where you're at and try shooting at it from here? What if you can't shoot it and instead need to get around it? That means if you run into it, you're gonna have to make some quick choices in order to avoid taking damage. This again insists upon certain strategies, like those of you who are smart might have realized the solution to this problem, should you have the ammo, is probably to let the zombie waddle a little closer to you to make sure it's within range of you killing it. That way you don't run right into it if the camera angle is a little more close than what you expect. This strategy, however, will not work at all with hunters, however, as they will be far too quick once they've decided they want to go and attack you, for this to feasibly do anything good for you. And thus the fixed camera angles, yet again, forces hard choices. But there is a second thing that the fixed camera angles do, something that is a bit less gameplay related and more so something a bit more abstract. That being atmosphere. Atmosphere is perhaps more than any other video game genre key to the experience of a good survival horror game. It can add to the tension, the suspense, or build upon the mood and thus horror of the situation. This is done through both sound and visuals. And talking about visuals right from the start, we find ourselves in a strange mansion with a grand staircase in the foyer, a grand dining room, various other art-related rooms, a piano room, offices, bedrooms, secret passages, and places between places, that being many, many hallways. It all speaks to this place being full of history, mystery, and yet it's all rather garish at times. It's funny when you think of a mansion, the word you probably think of first right before it is Gothic. And while there are certainly parts of this mansion that I would describe as Gothic, I'm not so sure if that's the total vibe here in Resident Evil. So many of the hallways, rooms, floors, walls, they all have these rather elaborate and bright colors, patterns and the like. They're a little bit psychedelic at times, a bit dingy in other places. It reminds me of the hotel of The Shining, which I suppose was an inspiration, but in general I'd say it also just reminds me of the 70s. A mansion less old and gothic and more modern for the time of the 70s, but very outdated and again kind of garish and odd by today's design sensibilities perhaps. This has an effect of each room having a really strong identity though, from the bright green, blue, or red halls, the various different baked-in lighting, wooden floors, marble floors, elaborately patterned carpets, you name it. It makes each new room both distinct, but also adds to the sense of discovery that you never really know what you're going to run into next, but also serves a purpose for the gameplay. It also makes memorizing the mansion and where you are in relation to other areas a bit easier for you as you comb your way through it. I also feel the fixed camera angles help build a bit of character. Like any good actual film, it really frames these settings in a distinct way. Sometimes the camera angles can even hint at certain traps, such as in the case of the Crushing Room Trap Room, which has an above camera angle, which sort of implies visually just how tall the ceiling is. And especially on your way out, you can also see the camera angle is a bit different here, again emphasizing just how tall the ceiling is, which are visual cues to sort of hint that there is perhaps something unseen and dangerous here. And again, as I said before, overall add to the sense of atmosphere. Add it all the more with the amazing soundtrack of the game. Right from the start, you have tracks like these which build on this sense of tension and mystery of the mansion. To later on, as we move through the mansion's corridors and into the courtyard, full of dogs and the guardhouse, with tracks such as these. To even further later on as we delve deeper into the mansion's lower levels and come to find an entire cave system and laboratories and the origin points of these strange experiments, and get tracks such as these. These tracks all build a sense of foreboding, and help in a large way to sell the overall, again, tension of the game even more. But the game's soundtrack is certainly far from one note, as we also have the oh-so-famous save room song. This track is without a doubt the most iconic from the game, because it not only stands out as calming and serene, but also it acts as a small reprieve, again, from the tension of the game. A moment of quiet for you to collect your thoughts, look through your items and the map in peace, and to save your game. Figure out where you want to go to next. When a new save room is discovered, there is almost always some extra ammo, healing items, ink ribbons for you as well, psychologically adding to that sense of ease. Also, while not music related, the general sound design of this game is also quite amazing. Everything from the sounds a creature makes to the satisfying pop of blowing a zombie's head off with your shotgun. It's all great. I also like some of the themes that the characters get, such as Rebecca, with her more light-hearted and cute sounding theme song being one of my favorite tracks in the game. Not to mention the absolute fucking killer soundtrack that is the ending credits theme. On note of characters, I suppose I should say that while if you play as Chris, again you'll encounter Rebecca, and if you play as Jill, then Barry will be your best companion, truth be told, how many times you encounter them, and if they live or die by the time the game comes to an end, is determined by choices you make during the game. I suppose not unlike that of Sweet Home. And once again, similar to Sweet Home, the best endings for both the characters are where you're able to save everyone that you can from this place, while the worst sees you leaving this nightmare completely alone. In Jill's scenario, you're basically playing the normal or easy difficulty of the game, as you'll have a total of 8 item slots on your person, which makes for easier wiggle room with what you can and can't carry. Chris, on the other hand, only has 6 item slots and thus needs to be much more careful. Jill also has Barry backing her up, and thus, for example, when you first encounter the zombie near the very start of the game, instead of fighting it yourself and using your precious resources, you can run away from it and go back to the dining room where Barry is inspecting some blood on the floor, and he'll kill it for you. Chris, on the other hand, has no such option. As noted earlier, there's a room early on where you can grab a shotgun, which makes your time fighting the zombies way easier should you have the ammo to spare. But if you grab the shotgun off the rack, it activates the trap in the room right next to it that you must pass through. And if you grab that shotgun without putting something there in its place and go into that room, you will be crushed alive. Well, that is, if you fall for this trap as Jill, Barry will actually come and help you escape the trap, allowing you to get away with getting the shotgun early and, well, leading to this rather famous exchange.
Hurry! This way!
Oh, Barry!
That was too close. You were almost a Jill sandwich.
You're right. Barry, thanks for saving my life.
While Chris, on the other hand, gets no such help, and thus is doomed to become a grilled Chris and cheese sandwich. Mind you, this is dependent on a trigger within the game. It is possible for Jill to actually go and grab the shotgun, and for Barry to not be there to save her, meaning you will end up becoming that aforementioned Jill sandwich. It seems this is dependent on whether you go to get the shotgun as early as possible, or you explore around a bit, and if you end up meeting Barry in a little cutscene where he'll give you some extra ammo in the main foyer, then it seems he's less likely to come and save you. Just figured I'd note that. Though either way, you can find a broken shotgun later on to avoid the trap altogether. Then we have the fact that Jill can open various locks in the game that Chris cannot without getting a small key, which means Jill will be able to get some cool items and ammo pretty quickly if you know where to look, whereas Chris will need to find the small keys and then take up an item slot holding that item key to then open up the slots to get more ammo, which again, he already has much more limited space, making the whole thing much more arduous for him. Jill also can gain access to the grenade launcher really early on in her playthrough, allowing her to fucking blow enemies into a mess of PS1 textures, should you have the ammo for it. And Barry will also occasionally give Jill more ammo, because he's just a chill dude like that. Though on Chris's playthrough, you can actually get 3 full heals from Rebecca from one of the save rooms should you pick the right option, so there is at least that for Chris, at least. All this to say, it's really worth playing as Jill your first time through, to get a good hold of the mechanics of the game, I would say, and then try Chris after, since he's far more difficult of the two, and really pushes the game and its systems to its limit a lot more. Either way though, both Chris and Jill's stories will have the same overall structure in which places you go to and in what order, generally speaking, both making their way through this mansion and uncovering the biohazard experiments hidden beneath it. It's in the game's conclusion that things can play out a bit differently, but still kind of the same, but different because of the characters at play. Both come to understand that the Umbrella Corporation has been testing their T-virus on animals in the pursuit of creating super weapons, and both Chris and Jill realize that this very T-virus is what turned all of the staff of this mansion into zombies. It's here that if you're playing as Jill, you'll find Chris locked up in a prison cell and need 3 MO discs to free him, with the vice versa being true if you're playing as Chris. And both, after making their way through the Chimera area, which are these bizarre creatures that crawl on the ceilings and can be particularly difficult to dodge or fight, and overall are probably some of the scariest enemies in the game if I'm being real. But at any rate, after you get through those, both will end up finding their way to the very bottom of this mansion, where the full truth lies. The ultimate weapon that the Umbrella Corporation wanted no one to find out about. And right there too is none other than our team captain, Albert Wesker, who reveals himself to be a traitor, working against us the whole time. Something that was hinted at earlier by one of the other STARS members, sort of, well, implying it before he was suddenly killed by Albert.
Wesker,
You did a fine job, Barry.
just as I thought.
I think you should stay away from Barry, Jill. I hear that his wife and 2 daughters will be in danger if he doesn't do everything I tell him to.
You are so cruel.
Well, you don't have to worry about anything, because you'll be free from this world very soon, Jill.
Why do you have to destroy stars?
That's Umbrella's intention. This laboratory has been engaging in dangerous experiments, and recently an accident has occurred. Anyway, this disaster cannot be made public.
That's why having stars nosing about is so inconvenient. So you're a slave of Umbrella now, along with these virus monsters.
I think you misunderstand me, Jill. To me, the monsters you mention mean nothing. I'm going to burn all of them together with this entire laboratory. I must complete my mission as ordered by Umbrella. Barry, go up on the ground and wait there.
Barry!
Albert Wesker is an Umbrella researcher, manipulating the STARS team to collect combat data on these creatures. It's here that if you play as Jill, you'll come to find Barry, your bro, your greatest ally through this whole nightmare, has betrayed you too. Of course, this is only because Wesker is blackmailing poor Barry, that if he doesn't do what he says, then Umbrella will capture and more than likely experiment and torture and then eventually kill his family. Guess you can't blame the guy. If you made the wrong choices up to this point, Barry will walk off and you'll eventually find him dying, with him asking you one last request before he's gone.
Embarrassed to see you now. Just leave me. Go quickly.
It's over, Barry. Wesker's dead.
Is that so? Jill, will you do me a favor? This is my last wish. Please give this photo to my family. Will you?
Sure.
Forgive me, Jill.
However, if you made all the right choices up till now, then Barry will stick around the corner and overhear Wesker rather, fucking stupidly saying that he doesn't really have anything he can do to Barry's family. He's just making him think he does. And he's just intimidating Barry because Wesker is just naturally intimidating. Barry overhears this, and this happens as a result.
All the research?
Better yet, I'm going to show you the tyrant.
Revealing that Barry was a bro and just looking out for his family through and through, and decides to help you. And if it wasn't clear, I would say that Barry is definitely the highlight of Jill's story overall. No matter which options you end up going through, be it the tragic end or him ultimately standing up for you in the end, I find his overall through line and him wanting to look out for his family but getting caught up in Albert Wesker's grander plan to be the most interesting aspect of Jill's story. But on the flip side, I'd say that Rebecca Chambers is my particular favorite part of Chris's story, as Rebecca Chambers has pretty much been his main source of help, be it with healing or solving the various puzzles that Chris is canonically too dumb to do himself, which is pretty charming in its own right. At any rate, this can also play out a few different ways when Chris and Rebecca ultimately end up meeting with Wesker. But at least in my playthrough, as you can see here, it looks as though Wesker has killed Rebecca for a moment, and then he leads Chris into the main tyrant room, where the tyrant is fully revealed. If you get here as Chris, this is actually a pretty funny exchange, as Chris is not impressed by this at all.
This is the ultimate life form. Tyrant! Chris? Stop it.
Wesker, you're pitiful.
But no matter the scenario, Wesker will end up unleashing the tyrant on you, foolishly thinking that it will obey his commands before it turns on him and kills him instantly.
Go to hell. Jill will join you too. Don't come this way! No!
You can't kill me.
You'll then have to face off against the tyrant at this point, it serving as the final boss. And I guess I didn't really bring up bosses at this point yet, but the game actually includes quite a few boss fights, including with Yawn, this giant big-ass snake, which you'll end up having to fight a few times. Plant 42, which is this giant plant that pretty much serves as the primary set piece, an overarching enemy of the guardhouse area that can either be defeated through brute force or through a chemistry puzzle, interestingly enough. And then there's also Big Tiger, this giant tarantula, and all of these fights can be rather difficult if you come in unprepared, but not so bad if you've saved some of your more heavy firepower for later. At any rate, you fight the tyrant and defeat it for a bit. If you're going for the best ending at this point, then this is where you will save either Chris or Jill from the prison. And then we have the epic conclusion, where the self-destruct sequence is either activated through one means or another, and you now must make your escape to the surface where team member Brad is up there in his helicopter. But the tyrant is not through with you just yet. In the end though, you have one more epic final battle with the tyrant, as the self-destruct sequence timer is ever ticking, before eventually Brad throws you a rocket launcher and you blow the creature the hell and back, before then making your escape from this living hell. And that's Resident Evil, the first true survival horror game, and everything about it, from visuals and sound, to the camera, the setting, the characters, plot, the controls, the core gameplay loop, is all crafted in what I can only describe as perfect for what it's trying to do. But it was also the first of its kind, and there are admittingly quite a few others that came out after its wake that improved on it in many ways in my opinion, taking many of its core ideas and pushing them, and eventually coming to surpass them. However, none of those sequels would have ever came to be, nor would any of the games inspired by this game would have ever been attempted, had this one not created such a perfect template to then add upon. That being a game that's both full of tension, and yet also very fun, and keeps you coming back for more. There's a fine balance between a game being suspenseful and full of tension, to the point of it just being a bit frustrating, to it being that exact same thing, but still having some kind of through line of fun or pulling you back in. It's a fine line to walk across, and it can be rather difficult, but for me at least, the original Resident Evil does pull that off quite nicely. It's also a game that's sort of meant to be replayed at least twice, but possibly more depending on the version that you have. But on the note of repeat playthroughs and other versions of the game, I would now like to address the more interesting concept of which version of Resident Evil you should be playing. Because from the get-go, this game was released multiple times over the years, and there are significant differences between them. So let's get into them real quick. So to start off with, I feel I should say that the original Resident Evil on the PlayStation 1, with this rather cool looking box art of Chris looking sort of like Ash from the Evil Dead, has a few major differences when it comes to its original Japanese Biohazard version and the one that was released in North America and European markets. The main name of the game here being its difficulty. In the original Japanese release, when you picked up ink ribbons, you would be given 3 ink ribbons, thus 3 saves, while in the American version you will only get 2 ink ribbons, and thus only 2 saves, which cuts down the wiggle room for saving by a lot, like a whole fucking lot actually. But that in of itself could still be kind of manageable, but the other difficulty change is with the aiming of your gun. In the original game, when you aim your gun, your character automatically turns to aim at the zombie or enemy that's closest near you. This is useful because it allows you to line up shots immediately, and helps you a lot with dealing with hunters, for example. And you can also kind of use it for aiming just to kind of gauge if there is indeed an enemy on a different camera angle that's just out of your view. Though you still have to manually aim up or down if you're trying to hit something higher or lower, if you want to go for a headshot, for example. While in the American version, auto-aim is completely disabled, and thus every encounter is now far more difficult. This was apparently done because Capcom USA asked for a tougher build over here, mainly because, well, rental stores were still a big thing here for games, something that pretty much was actually completely outlawed in Japan. Like, they basically wouldn't allow you to rent games at all over there. there over copyright issues or whatever. But over here, it was a booming business. And so, if you could rent a game and beat it over the weekend, then you would be far less likely to keep renting that game out, and far less likely to ever end up buying it, I guess was the thought process. And thus, the harder the game was to beat, the longer you would need to rent the game out, thus giving the rental store more money, and the developers more money, and possibly just pushing you to eventually buy the game outright. It's dumb, I know, but it is what it is. This is why the American version is harder, intentionally, than the Japanese one. And while it is an interesting challenge to get through the game without auto-aim, and with less saves overall, I personally would not recommend it as a first playthrough, unless you just want the authentic experience of buying the game from Europe or North American regions back in the day, since clearly having auto-aim was part of the original intent with the game. Both these changes were later rectified, however, with Resident Evil Director's Cut, which was originally shipped to compensate for Resident Evil 2's delay, which, well, we'll talk about Resident Evil 2 a little bit later. Nonetheless though, this version made all of the releases the standard difficulty of the original, with you collecting 3 ink ribbons per pickup and the auto-aim in full. You also, however, got a brand new Arrange mode, which features remix items, enemy placement, some new camera angles, tougher enemies with higher damage and HP, as well as a fast fire rate and occasionally headshot capable custom Beretta 92F handgun, as well as new outfits, and even the possibility of getting an infinite ammo Magnum handgun for getting the best score in Arrange mode. It was everything Resident Evil 1 was, but more of it, and better. It's personally the version I played through for this retrospective, and is in my opinion a pretty great way to play the game today, especially if you're playing it on an emulator like DuckStation. It also, through the Arrange mode, sort of allows you to have another playthrough or two, but mixed up enough to keep those who have mastered the game at this point on their toes. So overall, you can't really go wrong with this one. However, this version of the game is not to be confused with this version of the game that was released a year later, Director's Cut DualShock version. This version adds the DualShock analog controls plus vibration support. And while the vibration is pretty cool, the analog controls honestly don't matter all that much since this is a tank control game, and usually tank controls play much better on a good D-pad, at least in my opinion. They feel kind of weird on an analog stick to me. However, the other major difference here is the completely new soundtrack that replaces all the original tracks in the game with new ones. While some of the tracks are actually pretty well made here, they also aren't those iconic tracks from the original game, the music that largely helps so much in building its original atmosphere. And then of course there are some tracks that are just, well, awful. I'll give you a quick side-by-side comparison of several of the tracks. Some that I think are actually pretty decent, but just maybe not as good as the original, and some that just are, well, you'll see. as you can see, some aren't too bad, while others are definitely a downgrade overall. While the rest of the game is still just as great as the normal director's cut, there's really no reason to not just play the normal one these days. Though again, not all the tracks are bad, and by all means, since I know a lot of people mostly just talk about the basement track you heard, which, yeah, is quite bad, there's some that are still pretty good if you want to try playing the game again, but with a slightly different atmosphere. There is also the PC port, which is the only version with the full color uncensored FMVs. But mind you, it doesn't work out of the box. In order to play this version, you'll need to install the Classic Rebirth mod, which, to be fair, is easy enough. You just kinda gotta drag and drop it into the game's directory, and bam, it works. And this is what is often considered the best or even definitive way to play the game. It runs perfectly this way. You can even have extra features like the quick turn ability, which was introduced in later entries. Though if you go down this rabbit hole, you can also add other mods onto this, including the Seamless HD mod, which AI upscales all the textures to have them looking like this. Mind you, this can look a little weird in places, but thankfully there's also the mod Re-Enhance that you can also install after the Seamless HD mod that cleans up the quality and makes the game look really fucking cool. Like it was remastered fully. Mind you, if you don't want to mess around with any of this stuff, then you could always go for the GOG versions of the game, which in of themselves has a lot of these mods and features built into that release. The game looks quite sharp and runs right out of the box with no messing around with mods. But you can still also install all the mods I just talked about in this version as well, making it pretty much the definitive way to play the game. Or, and I'll talk about this in a bit more detail later, you could always go to the biorand website and simply download this pack right here for completely free and get the first 3 Resident Evil games with the extra mods that I just talked about, plus the mod Biorand to play with them. I've heard in a lot of the other YouTube retrospectives that people say it's a little difficult to get the PC versions of these games without going through GOG, but truth be told, it really isn't. Just go here. It's pretty simple and it's free. There are also more mods than that, but I think I'll talk about those just a little bit later on. But needless to say, if you want the authentic original Resident Evil experience, then the 2 main ways I would recommend playing it is either through playing it with the director's cut on the PS1 through the DuckStation emulator, or I guess through a physical copy should you be lucky enough to have that, or by simply playing it through the PC version through either buying it on GOG or just simply through downloading it with the Biorand collection. Well, that's it for what I would call the basic releases for getting the original experience in some sort of way. There are still 2 other versions not brought up as much as these ones, that being the Sega Saturn port and the Nintendo DS port. The Sega Saturn port is basically the original non-director's cut version of the game, meaning that over here there is also no auto aim, and also still you only get 2 ink ribbons per ink ribbon pickup. But, interestingly enough, in this version, and this version alone, Chris and Jill have different skills with their guns. Jill apparently shoots faster than Chris, while Chris draws his weapon faster, which admittedly kind of sounds like they sort of equal out to being the exact same, but I don't know, maybe there's a slight difference in how it feels. However, on the whole, this game plays much the same as the original North American release of Resident Evil, thus not making it ideal in my opinion for a first playthrough, since it doesn't have the proper aiming mechanics or the director's cut stuff that was introduced later on. However, there is some other cool stuff with the Sega Saturn version that makes it worth playing if you want to try it in a slightly different way. Notably stylistically, this game looks a fair bit different in some areas. While the pre-rendered backgrounds remain all the same, all the 3D models are completely different here, with everyone's color palettes being noticeably more saturated. But also, the 3D models are far more blocky. In fact, everyone in the Sega Saturn release looks fucking jacked as all hell compared to the original, which is pretty amusing. Many of the textures and particle effects are different here as well, with most either being kind of different or a slight downgrade due to the limitations of the Sega Saturn, such as with glass effects blood effects and anything with transparency, like the smoke from a gunshot now having dithering effects instead of just the transparent shadow effect. One I never hear anyone bring up though is the fact that the much more brightly colored models really stick out against the pre-rendered backgrounds like a sore thumb here. Still though, there is some pretty cool bespoke content here in this version that makes this one actually worth a try if you want to experience some brand new stuff with the original Resident Evil. Firstly, they have added a new hunter variation to the underground cave section of the game called Ticks. Now they are mostly just a cosmetic change for hunters, but still, they're really cool nonetheless, and pretty creepy looking. There is also another round with the Tyrant in the lab on Chris's playthrough, meaning on his playthrough you fight the Tyrant 3 times, which is actually pretty interesting. But the most fascinating and perhaps most influential addition to this version of the game is a game mode that unlocks after beating the game at least one time. This being essentially a mode where you go from room to room in a gauntlet fighting every type of enemy in the game with a limited amount of ammo. It's pretty cool and forces you to fight encounters you might not have ever bothered with before. Like, who's going into the painting room and shooting all the fucking crows? Seems like a waste of time, right? But in this mode, you're forced to do it and see how you fare. It also features a brand new, harder Golden Tyrant as the final boss. And before that, it also features a zombie version of Wesker that you have to kill to proceed through the gauntlet, which back then I'm sure was just a silly little joke, an Easter egg for this mode. If only they knew where the story of Resident Evil as a franchise would end up heading off to. I also say this mode is rather influential because it sort of seems like a proto-mercenary mode, which became a very popular game mode in future releases for the franchise. Anyway, then finally we have the DS version of the game, which has some pretty cool additions. Firstly, you always have your map on one of the screens, meaning there is less opening and closing the map over and over again here. But also, it has its brand new rebirth mode, where you have new enemy placements and enemy encounters here, some of which are pretty wild. You also now have several puzzles you can solve using the touchscreen. There are also new encounters that happen when you enter some rooms, where there will be zombies that you have to take out in first person using your stylus to swipe up and down and across to kill them. There's also a section where you use the DS microphone to give CPR to Richard, or you end up having to fight the Yawn a 3rd time here. There's also a local 2 to 4 player co-op / versus challenge mode as well, sort of harkening back to the concept of the original Resident Evil having a co-op mode. Oh, you can also quick turn here, and everything also has new textures, new animations, and in general, looks pretty damn good. Pretty sharp as a matter of fact when it comes to 3D models, though some of the backgrounds do look a bit more compressed compared to the original versions. On the whole though, it's a pretty unique way to play the game, and some even swear by it being one of their favorite versions of the game. And so I'd say it's well worth checking out if you really want a different experience from the original on a portable device. However, with all that being said, while we have talked about every version of this classic game, there is still something worth talking about, because while this game may be an all-time classic, its remake is just as, if not more beloved than it. And so with that in mind, let's talk about the Resident Evil remake. Resident Evil 1 Remake was made in 2002, so by that point, it had only been around 6 or so years since the original game had came out, and several sequels were made in that time as well. While most video game remakes made these days are anywhere from 10 to 20 years removed from their original release, this was not the case whatsoever with this game. It also had the same director as the original in Shinji Mikami, meaning this would be a sort of redo of the original by many of the same people. Resident Evil Remake, which from here on I'll refer to as just simply Remake, was developed by Capcom Production Studio 4, and it was part of an exclusivity agreement between Capcom and Nintendo to bring previous and new Resident Evil games to the GameCube. This would result in the GameCube, for the time being the premier console if you wanted to play Resident Evil, because they would end up re-releasing Resident Evil 2, 3, Code Veronica, as well as 2 brand new games in Resident Evil 0 and Resident Evil 4 on there. But we're getting ahead of ourselves yet again. The other main thing it resulted in was this complete, from the ground up, remake of the original game that started it all. Unlike Resident Evil 2, 3, and Code Veronica, which were simply ported to the GameCube, Mikami decided to produce a remake of the original game because he felt its graphics had not aged well, making it hard for new players to appreciate it. Producer Hiroyuki Kobayashi also felt that the GameCube could allow them to more closely achieve the vision they had for this franchise going forward, and really have next level motion picture quality visuals. Thus, the remake was conceived as both an homage to the original, and to be a more polished, technically ambitious version that could appeal to veterans and new players alike. The development of Remake spanned about 14 months from start to finish, starting back in 2001. Because the GameCube was relatively new hardware when development began, the developers first had to understand its architecture, performance constraints, and potential. In initial planning, the developers considered fully 3D real-time environments for the mansion and surroundings. However, they realized that the processing and memory demands would exceed that of the GameCube's hardware, at least in its desired quality that they wanted. And so they reverted back to the classic model of pre-rendered backgrounds plus polygonal character models and objects. Kind of ironic that even with the brand new hardware, their ambitions for this game could still not be contained without workarounds. That said, the team added more dynamic camera angles, environmental animations, examples being fog, ambient lighting effects, real-time shadows, and lightning on the 3D models, as well as volumetric effects to enrich the atmosphere, thus still taking advantage of what new tech was there. Originally, the developers planned to only upgrade the graphics and tweak the gameplay a bit, but as the project evolved, more changes in layout, scripting, puzzles than initially anticipated were introduced. And before long, Remake would come to not just be a simple remake, but a reimagining of the game in nearly every way. And so I suppose we ought to talk about all those changes that were made along the way now. Starting with the most obvious change, the visuals. To put it simply, these were not merely some graphical upgrade, but a complete change in art direction. While the original game, as I noted before, felt like it took place in a strange 70s shining hotel-inspired mansion, here the mansion is much darker, moodier, and gothic. Where there was once bright colors and fairly well-lit areas, there is now much darker and muted colors, intense shadows, and the place is mostly lit up by candlelight rather than wall lights. It immediately creates a very different atmosphere, one that you could argue takes less from the B-movie inspiration of the original and more so something traditionally spooky, as this place feels much older now. A mansion, a home from a bygone era. The main foyer no longer has a garishly patterned carpet, but now instead has a dark wine red carpet. The place isn't lit up by wall lamps, but elegant candlesticks that gleam off the glossy marble floors. The little kitchen that once looked sort of still and sterile now looks grimy, filthy, probably some terrible smell emanating from the place. Clean, reddish-brown wooden floors have now been replaced with filthy carpets. The moonlight outside is now a central part of the atmosphere, as it casts light over the interiors of the home. The camera angles chosen for these areas is also much more close and intimate, almost making certain scenes feel more claustrophobic, where the original gives you a wider view from its camera angles. None of this is shade against the original though, as I still love the way that it looks as well, and they both have their strengths in that regard. For me, the original has what I would call a haunted VHS quality. That is to say, it's got that grimy 70s or 80s slasher film or zombie movie feel that I absolutely love, and gives a sense of dread that's more to do with its rough and strange presentation. while Remake is a masterclass in atmospheric realism. Every flicker of lightning or dripping shadow adds a different sort of dread than the original does. Something much more akin to a Dracula's castle or an old foggy graveyard from many of the classic 30s horror films in black and white. This is to say nothing about the sections that are either changed drastically from the original or completely brand new here, like the cemetery in the back, or this entire set of hallways with mirrors and knights' armors flanked around you, or the guardhouse aqua ring, which in the original was this cool little set piece where you're in a pool of water that has a giant shark named Neptune in it. Mind you, it's sort of just there and then gone within a minute, since as soon as you see it, you're going to be heading into a room where you're going to drain the water, and then it's no longer a threat to you. It just sort of, well, floundering around there. It's a cool set piece nonetheless though, that gets a bit of an unexpected scare out of you. While here it's a bit of a longer section, with there now being multiple sharks that you gotta wade through, and now Neptune is a fucking megalodon-sized shark. You gotta drain the water by solving a time-based puzzle. If you don't do it in time, well... making for one of the more memorable set pieces of this remake. Even after you drain the water, in fact, you still gotta kill the thing in another tense scene. There's a lot of stuff like that though. There are new puzzles, new collectible items, new encounters with creatures, and the setup of the mansion being quite different. Small changes like this door that normally is a safe means of getting to the safe room in the mansion can now only be entered through one way twice before the doorknob breaks, and it becomes a one-way door for some time in the game, or enemies later on breaking through windows or rushing through doors suddenly without warning. Changes the way you route your path through the mansion, but also keeps you on your toes because at any moment there could be something you aren't expecting, adding to that sense of tension that the original was built around. But perhaps the most ingenious of these new additions in the remake are those of the Crimson Heads. In universe, Crimson Heads are a secondary mutation of standard zombies caused by the T-virus. When a zombie's body is left unattended to after getting killed, the virus can reanimate it into this more aggressive form through rapid regeneration and mutation, with like red skin and gnarly teeth and claws, meaning that now not even killing zombies can be done stress-free in the remake. What was once something that felt empowering and a relief to some of the pressure in the original game is now a whole new stress to worry about. When you kill a regular zombie by shooting it until it falls, its body often remains on the floor. If left alone for too long, the corpse reanimates into a Crimson Head. The transformation is triggered by game time, not real-world time, specifically a few minutes of in-game progress, such as entering and exiting rooms or triggering cutscenes. The transformation can occur even when you're far from the room, or terrifyingly when you're walking through said room. They'll suddenly wake up and start dashing at you, with an increased health pool, faster movement, and much more powerful attacks. And mind you, these things in the right spot can be no joke and can wreck you quick. But there is a means of stopping this from happening. There are two ways to permanently prevent a zombie from becoming a Crimson Head. The first is by burning the body using kerosene and a lighter. This completely destroys the infected tissue, preventing reanimation. On the Jill playthrough, this also means carrying around two extra items, the lighter and the kerosene, so it takes up precious item slot room, while Chris gets some form of a break here with the lighter always being equipped on him rather than taking up an item slot. However, kerosene is very limited. You must refill the fuel canteen from sparse wall-mounted tanks around the mansion, and that means another thing you have to manage with your other items. But more than that, there is, truth be told, not enough kerosene to prevent them all from turning into Crimson Heads, meaning you're gonna have to face them no matter what. But that is no reason to slack on this, because killing them takes up precious ammo resources, on top of them being far more difficult to deal with. And also, if you don't take them seriously as a threat, then this whole mansion will be crawling with them, and the game will now be way fucking harder for you. And so, finding a way to get rid of these Crimson Heads before they ever start appearing becomes part of the new gameplay loop here. Which zombies are even worth killing becomes a completely new question. And when I do kill them, which ones can I let turn into a Crimson Head, and which ones would be an issue for me if they became one. Say for example, ones in heavy traffic areas or next to a save room, etc. would probably be pretty bad, while ones in areas that you're only ever going to visit like once or twice are a bit more safe to just kind of let them become what they're naturally supposed to become. It has a fair bit more depth to the gameplay and just overall extra tension, as well as serving the main purpose of making the Spencer Mansion more dynamic and unpredictable. They were designed by Shinji Mikami and the remake team to keep the player uneasy even after clearing a room, and they very much succeed in just that. Mind you, the other way you can get rid of them is by a headshot with a shotgun at close range or a magnum, destroying the zombie's head, permanently killing it, and not allowing them to evolve into a Crimson Head whatsoever. However, unlike the original game, this can be a bit random if you're gonna get a headshot or not. There's a bit of RNG involved, so even that you cannot rely on 100% of the time. You can also, in a few rare cases, try and kill multiple zombies in a room and have their corpses pile on top of each other, and then light them all on fire at the same time, which is pretty cool that they allow this option in the game if you ever thought to try it. I personally found this out by complete accident though. On the whole though, the concept of enemies coming back makes every kill feel uncertain. Sound design also emphasizes their shrieks and clawed footsteps, heightening dread anytime you walk back into a room you were previously in and you just know that your shit is about to get rocked. It also reinforces the survival horror ethos of killing isn't always the safest option, or at least that's what they usually say on the back of the boxes, in probably one of the most clever ways possible to showcase that. And it's just overall really genius game design, and it alone, with the added atmosphere, makes Remake well worth playing in its own right. While the original is much more straightforward with a more arcade-like structure, emphasizing learning patterns and optimizing routes, Remake has a slightly deeper mechanics and forces long-term planning with your routes and what moves you make next within the game, heightening the sense of vulnerability and tension that comes with messing up. There is also other additions to the gameplay, such as defensive items like daggers, tasers, flash grenades, and the like, all of which can help you get out of a pickle if a zombie, or worse, a Crimson Head or Hunter, grabs onto you in the game, allowing you a moment to back up and finish it or run away. There is also an alternative moveset which turns off the tank controls and allows you to freely move around like in more modern games. However, the game was not built around this option, and it frankly trivializes most encounters with any enemy or boss in the game, and for that reason I would really not recommend playing it with this control scheme if you wanted the intended experience. And unlike others who say they won't judge you if you do decide to play with them, I will judge you and call you a big baby bitch if you do this. The soundtrack is also amazing here, with the remake having a more ambient and at times more intense sound to its soundtrack, again matching its very different tone quite nicely. Speaking of that different tone, this is also applied to the story, characters, and acting in general, with much of the extra B-movie cheese cut out here for a more serious take on the tale, with a much darker underlying story to boot.
What is this?
Wow, what a mansion!
Captain Wesker, where's Chris?
Stop it! Don't open that door!
What is this place?
Not quite your ordinary house, that's for sure.
Hey, Wesker, where's Chris?
Jill, no! You don't want to go back out there.
What is this?
What is it?
Blood. Jill, see if you can find any other clues. I'll be examining this. Hope this is not Chris's blood.
I think you'd better take a look at this.
What is it?
Blood. Jill, see if you can find any other clues. I'll be examining this. Let's just hope it's not Chris's.
It's me, Chris.
Is that you, Rebecca?
Ah, it's the Moonlight Sonata.
Can you play? Wait, what is that?
My interpretation is off a little. Chris, may I practice for a while?
See? Just relax and play.
All right.
It's me, Chris.
Rebecca.
That sounded like Moonlight Sonata.
Can you play? Oh, what was that?
My interpretation is off a little. Let me practice for a while.
Of course, all the characters having facial expressions does help a lot in selling the story, I suppose, as well as them all looking pretty damn iconic here. I won't harp on it here all that much, but I will say the model here for Jill is always what I associate with her character, despite them changing the way she looks, frankly quite a lot over the years, as well as almost every other character too, except oddly for Wesker. He always looks the same no matter what game you're playing. I guess you just can't evolve on sheer perfection and a character design, now can you? While the core plot follows the original game closely, the remake greatly expands upon the backstory and adds new subplots, notably that of Lisa Trevor and her family. In the remake, Jill and Chris discover the story of the Trevor family, who were among the mansion's first victims. George Trevor was an architect who designed the mansion's elaborate traps for Spencer, and who was later lured into and killed to keep its secrets. And then we have Jessica and Lisa Trevor, his wife and daughter, who were kidnapped and used as test subjects for the early progenitor and T-virus experiments. Lisa becoming an immortal, deformed creature, her mind shattered but clinging to memories of her mother. It is a tragic but also rather scary figure you'll have to face off against a few times in the game. And with her being unkillable, it means you're gonna have to run away from her, and in one case, dodge around her, making for some very tense scenes. She's even in a new area of the mansion when you first encounter her, haunting the mansion's forest cabin and underground caves. In your final encounter with her, you'll come to understand that Lisa has been wearing her mother's preserved face as a mask this whole time, trying to find her mother, who she doesn't quite seem to understand is dead. And Lisa, upon seeing her mother's remains, then falls to her death in distress and agony. The Trevor Family Edition, I think, is one of the strongest narrative differences between the original and the remake, because they not only explain why the mansion was built this way, but it also paints it all in a fog of tragedy in my mind that makes the Umbrella Corporation's evil actions all the more sickening and twisted. While they were always evil in the original game, many of the zombies you face off against are the employees, scientists, people who tried to play God and paid the ultimate price for it. It's tragic, but not nearly as much as a family, including a little girl, a child being experimented upon. It, in my mind, also, interestingly enough, adds to Barry's story a lot here, because, as a family man, his betrayal of Jill under the blackmail of Wesker is far more venomous here, because Barry has an example what could end up happening to his wife and kid if he stands against Wesker, which is very haunting and again also adds to Wesker's evil. It's kind of like an original sin that paints the whole mansion in a far more evil yet tragic coat of paint that adds a lot more emotional weight to certain scenes and what destroying the mansion ultimately represents. It's an amazing remake, if you couldn't tell, and a must-play for any fan of survival horror games, and just in general in my opinion. But the one thing I do want to note is that I don't at all feel like it replaces the original game, as many have sadly said over the years, because while they are similar, they are very different experiences, and that's by design. It's why I would say both are worth playing through at least once, if not twice. It's not a matter of which is better, they are both amazing, some in similar ways and some in very different ways. It's a case of there being two amazing games that, in their own right, define much of what being a scary video game even meant to people. But before we come to the final conclusions about both of these games, I'd like to have a little bonus section that you can expect for pretty much all the retrospectives on this channel going forward, where I'm now going to show you some cool fan-made content, interesting facts about both the games you might not have known about, and even some cool merch history. So, with that in mind, let's dive into that. So let's start with some trivia, and I guess a pretty easy one to note would be that originally Resident Evil was going to share its Japanese name of Biohazard over here in the West, but it was ultimately changed to Resident Evil due to existing trademarks, including those of a metal band, which you can kind of see here, and a lesser known video game, which again you can see here. In the German version of the original Resident Evil, it was further censored than the other versions, with the blood being turned green instead of red. It is never mentioned where in the US the fictional Raccoon City and the nearby Arklay Mountains are located, apart from that it is in a Midwestern town. However, in the novels based on the games written by S.D. Perry, it is said that they are located in Pennsylvania, though this is obviously not canon, but still kind of interesting, I suppose. On that note, has anyone ever read these books? Should I read them? Are they any good? Are they bad? Let's be real. Did you even know they existed until just this point when I pointed them out? Well, anyway, did you also know that there was going to be a Game Boy Color version of the original game, which you can see gameplay footage of here? It, well, I mean, let's be real, it does kind of look like shit, but at the same time, it's actually very impressive that they managed to sort of sell a 3D environment on a Game Boy Color. But it went unreleased ultimately. I suppose they it would have been a funny little novelty version to have exist though, so I kind of am sad it never came out. But I can also see why they ultimately scrapped the idea later, though they would end up making a Game Boy Color Resident Evil, but we'll talk about that one at a later date, since it's its own game and story. In every version of Resident Evil 1, where there are alternate outfits, there are almost always completely different alternate outfits with each release, with there seemingly being no version that has every single one of the alternate outfits. Unless there's possibly a mod that's done that, but to my knowledge, there is not. As noted from near the beginning of this video, the producers of this game were expecting it to only appeal to a niche audience, and at best, sell around 200,000 copies. The game ended up becoming a major hit, however, and went on to sell millions of copies, which with how many versions of the game were made, and it getting a whole ass remake just 6 years later, and it getting all those sequels between then and there, I suppose that's something you might have guessed by now. Beyond basic trivia though, I did say I wanted to highlight a few of the mods on PC that you can install beyond the basic making stuff look better mods. But instead, how about brand new content? The first of these is the aptly titled Barry mod, where you can play through the original game as Barry. While there's nothing too groundbreaking as far as new content goes here, it does yet again switch up where certain items are placed, what keys are needed to open what doors, and you of course also get Barry's badass magnum gun right from the start. There's also new cutscenes here to expand upon the route for Barry, though don't get too excited, as far as I'm aware there's no voice acting for them, but still, it is nice in thought. So if you ever wanted to replay the game, but with a new arranged mode with a bit of a different perspective on the story, or you just wanted to play as Barry because, be fair, who wouldn't, then this is a pretty cool mod for that. Another cool mod on the same sort of brainwave as just kind of wanting to play as a cool character is Wesker's Rebirth, which is about, well, Albert Wesker's rebirth. Yeah, if you were somehow not aware, our cool sunglasses wearing bad guy who got murked by the tyrant didn't actually die then and there. In fact, Albert Wesker will end up becoming the main antagonist for the series for some time. But this then begs the question, how did he end up surviving the tyrant and end up escaping from the mansion before it blew up? Well, this mod goes about sorta trying to answer that question. The mod lets you experience the story of Albert Wesker as he fights his way through the Arkley Research Facility and Spencer Mansion to escape before the entire complex self-destructs. That means you're gonna have to work your way backwards from the end of the game to the start of the game, and you'll only have 10 minutes to escape the mansion, and there are now way more zombies and monsters everywhere, making this a super difficult run back through the facility under that time limit, making for a pretty fun but challenging mod. Oh, and also, Lisa Trevor is here as a new boss for Wesker, which is, well, she wasn't in the original game, but hey, it's pretty cool. They even made a whole new model for her for this mod, so yeah. Another mod, which is probably one of, if not the most elaborate ones for the original Resident Evil, is Resident Evil Containment, which according to the ModDB page is, quote, a new total conversion mod for the original 1996 release of Resident Evil. It follows the story of Ghost, a member of the Umbrella Security Service, who was sent to the Arkley Research Facility to investigate a distress call. This mod takes place shortly before the events of Resident Evil 0 and the original Resident Evil, unquote. This mod features a whole new story, cutscenes, as well as many brand new locations, some of these new locations being based off of the scrap prototype concept art for Resident Evil as well. There is also locations that are connected with Resident Evil 0 too, which we'll talk about another time. It also contains new puzzles, new events, new music, and even a couple new gameplay mechanics. It's basically a brand new game slash remix on the original game, and while I haven't played this mod myself, it is without a doubt extremely impressive from everything I've seen. Maybe I could stream it at some point. We can experience it together. Let me know in the comments down below if you would like to see that. Finally, what is without a doubt the coolest mod for Resident Evil, not just this one, but many of the games, is biorand. Biorand is a a randomizer tool / mod built for the Resident Evil series. The idea behind a randomizer is to take aspects of a game that are typically fixed, like where items, enemies, keys, etc. appear, and shuffle or randomize them. This gives each playthrough a fresh, unpredictable experience. Enemy types, their positions, spawn rates, and ratios, how many of which enemy type, can be randomized. Doors, which normally lead to fixed rooms, can be remapped or shuffled, making navigation more unpredictable or near impossible in places. You can also randomize your initial gear, or even switch which character you play as. There's a lot of levers and sliders and customization in general. You can fine-tune how aggressive enemies are, how scarce resources are, and other parameters to control how punishing or casual the experience ends up being. And it's saying nothing about how cutscenes are affected by this, with there being entire cutscenes that could play out with characters that were never meant to be there, but must sort of play out the cutscene with their own dialogue that they spoke from the games they appear in, making for some pretty funny interactions, such as these.
I have to prepare something. Would you like to go ahead?
I've heard that name before.
It's open.
God damn it! Just go.
I tried to save him, but I'm afraid it's already too late.
If I die, you have to shoot me in the head.
That's right.
You don't want to go back out there.
At the pharmaceutical room I found a little while ago, I think I will be able to make something.
You'll never understand.
Yes, sir! I'll do my best! Yes, I have decided not to grieve any longer.
We'll make sure we find her. Don't you worry about her. My, we've got a feisty one.
Okay, you can depend on me. But we only have enough medicine for 3 more doses.
How dare you! No more games! Kill him!
Failed me!
A few years ago, the BSAA received intel as to the whereabouts of Umbrella's founder, Oswald E. Spencer.
I'll get the valve. You cover my back.
Your future hinges upon this fight.
More and more, I find myself wondering if it's all worth fighting for. For a future without fear? Yeah, it's worth it.
Only a handful of humans truly matter. Everyone else is just so much chaff. So now, I have to separate this chaff from the wheat.
Listen up! In the BSAA, our job is to rid the world of bioterrorism. And the only way we're gonna do that is by sticking together.
Everywhere, nothing but loathsome humans.
Ever since Adonia, all I've wanted is to see you dead. But this isn't about vengeance. It's about justice.
As you might imagine, biorand makes for the perfect streaming / speedrunning challenge, with each playthrough giving a unique experience, and can lead to some truly crazy moments, be they really funny or even really fucking horrifying, with there being powerful enemies and bosses nearly everywhere. This gives infinite replayability, which I feel really fits with the spirit of Resident Evil anyway, since the games are pretty much designed to always be replayed multiple times. It is also, as I said, a mod that can be paired along perfectly with that collection of Resident Evil 1, 2, and 3 that you can download on their website. And so I highly recommend that you give it a try for yourself. And yet again, I will definitely be streaming myself playing through a couple sessions of Biorand sometime very soon. Besides this, did you know that there was a promotional VHS tape made around the time of Resident Evil's release in Japan called The Birth of Biohazard? I've shown some footage of it throughout this video, but the VHS features a 36-minute documentary describing the production of Resident Evil, or Biohazard. It features interviews from Shinji Mikami and Jun Takeuchi, as well as sort of narrated portions talking about each one of the characters from the game. It's all in Japanese, of course. However, if you want to watch the full thing with English captions, then the YouTube channel DozyD, as seen here, has it on their channel with English captions. On that note of Resident Evil merchandise, there's actually several action figures and figures made around Resident Evil back in the day, some of which have even become sort of rare collector's items over the years. And so I'm gonna go ahead and showcase some of the main brands that made stuff around the first original game. Mind you, some of these companies will be coming back as we talk about some of the later entries in the franchise. Starting with Toy Biz action figures, which made several of the very first Resident Evil related action figures, including the following. The Tyrant, which had a button on the Titan's heart which caused its chest to simulate a heartbeat, as well as an action where you could pull back his left claw, allowing it to simulate the creature slashing at you. A Forest and Maggot Zombie combo, where it came with both of these action figures. The zombie in particular here looking really damn good and had the distinct ability of having all of his limbs being able to be torn off, a la kind of like how they look whenever you shoot a grenade launcher bullet at them. Well, Forrest had an action where you could be laying down on this little bit of floor and then pop up ready to attack and kill some of the other star members. Then there is the Chimera and Hunter combo pack, which is quite a cool combo pack because both these action figures actually look quite nice. The Hunter apparently had a slash attack action where he is like emulating his slashing attack he would do on you in the game, while the Chimera has an exploding action where if you press the little slot on its chest, its head would fly off on a string. Next we have the Web Spinner and Jill Valentine combo. Jill comes with her bazooka, which is pretty cool. Her figure herself is okay. She's definitely not looking exactly on model here at all, and for some reason it seems as though they've decided to make her a ginger. But I suppose if you want one of, if not the first ever Jill action figure, that's the price you pay. Meanwhile, the Web Spinner looks pretty good here and has a little thing where it can shoot out a web attack at you. And finally, from Toy Biz, we have the Cerberus and Chris Redfield combo. Chris here looks, he's looking alright. But yet again, the Cerberus dog actually looks quite nice, and again has an exploding action where he falls apart into like 2 or 3 pieces, which is quite gnarly, and a bit funny looking at it, but yeah, not too bad. A different company known as Palisades also made this cool Tyrant figure, which has a lot of really cool detail and is definitely a bit of an upgrade from the Toy Biz one from earlier. I especially love the details of the gore, the big fleshy heart, and the general expression he's got going on. Palisades also made this pretty cool Hunter figure as well from around that same time. That actually came with an Albert Wesker figure, though the Albert Wesker one is not based on the Resident Evil 1 Albert Wesker model, but instead his appearance in Code Veronica. In general, Palisades made a lot more figures around Resident Evil 2 and Code Veronica, so we'll talk about them more when we get to those games. Next we have the Moby Dick product. Once again have another Tyrant figure, though this one is definitely the worst of the 3 I would say thus far. The paint and everything's pretty cool, but the facial expression and a lot of the other stuff is definitely a lot less detailed. Then we actually have one from the Resident Evil remake in the form of this zombie and Cerberus, which boasts on the package that they have removable limbs. And these look very detailed and super cool actually. I especially love how they've managed to capture the rather gnarly looking mouth and gore of the Cerberus. This figure combo coming from NECA. NECA also made this Jill Valentine, which is rather interesting because she has a completely black variation on her normal outfit, which looks actually pretty cool. This particular figure was designed this way because it was in celebration of Resident Evil as a series series' 10th anniversary, which is apparently based on the beta version of the game where all STARS uniforms were black. Or so the Resident Evil wiki says, as I tried to look this up and couldn't really find any evidence that there was ever a time in any of the betas where all the STARS uniforms were completely black. Nevertheless, it is a cool look, even if the figure itself is kind of dopey looking, as it kind of looks like Jill has shit her pants and is trying to not make a bigger mess of it. At least that's how I interpret this particular pose. She does, however, come with a lot of accessories and stuff, which is pretty cool. On the flip side, they also made a remake version of Chris Redfield, who also similarly comes with several accessories as well. It actually looks pretty good here. It seemed like for quite a while they were pretty good at making the monster figures, but when it came to the human figures with Resident Evil, it took them a little while to start really getting it down right. NECA would also end up making a remake variation of the Tyrant, which once again looks quite nice and is very detailed. I particularly like the details on his big claw hand. A figure of a remake Hunter, which looks amazing. Everything from the ultra detailed scales, the coloring, and even the weird drool effects that are like dripping down its mouth, it's all really good. And NECA also made a Crimson Head figure as well, which yet again is very detailed and looks super duper cool. In particular, the gore effects on the left arm, and it also yet again comes with a Cerberus dog, which looks pretty damn good. I like the exposed skull part in particular. NECA would actually make quite a few of these zombie variations, like this one where it's a lab coat zombie. NECA also made a bunch of other miscellaneous Resident Evil related products like a STARS Police chain wallet, a STARS Police keychain, a STARS Police lighter, which I had a little bit of trouble finding, but this one's actually one of those items that's very popular. In fact, the Zippo company actually did an official Zippo STARS Raccoon Police lighter, which is pretty damn cool. I did, however, find this picture of the Umbrella Corporation variation of the NECA lighter, so I'm sure the NECA version of the STARS Police one looked somewhat similar. Definitely not as cool as the official Zippo one. Okay, now we're really getting into the fucking weeds of this shit. Did you know there's a curry of Biohazard? Yeah, didn't come out until like 2014, mind you. This wasn't coming out back in the 90s or anything. This stuff was apparently made by Geek Life Corporation and is a bright green curry inspired by the green herbs. This full name being known as Anti-Zombie Curry, Curry of the Biohazard, Green Herb Recovery Curry. So I'm sure you must be wondering, well, is it any good? Well, according to a 10-year-old review from someone in Japan who had it readily available to them, it apparently tasted okay. Sort of good with a bitter aftertaste and was a little bit watery and had some chickpeas in it. So there you go. That being said, not to get too off topic, but when am I ever going to get to talk about this again, but on the Geek Life website, there's also several other video game and series themed curries, including a Street Fighter 2 curry, a motherfucking Sonic the Hedgehog curry, which, according to this picture, is a disgusting bright blue color, as well as randomly a Chucky bloody curry, which, yes, as you might imagine, is blood red colored. And they also happen to have a bloody pasta, Chucky themed pasta sauce, which also looks really gross, but I guess pretty cool that it's themed around it pretty well. All these products look rather uniquely disgusting, and I don't want to get too lost in the weeds, but again, I figured I might as well showcase them here since I kind of discovered them as I was doing research for this video. I could keep going here with these, but I think you've gotten the gist and have gotten a good taste of several Resident Evil themed merchandise of all shapes and sizes. We'll of course be going over more as we enter into other entries of the franchise, but for now, let's wrap things up and I'll give my final thoughts on both the original Resident Evil and Resident Evil Remake. The original Resident Evil was built on the premise of limitation as tension. Everything about it, from tank controls, fixed camera angles, limited ammo and saves, forced the player into a constant state of anxiety. It was not only about what you saw, but what you couldn't see as well. His voice acting and stilted writing, while famously awkward, gave it a distinct B-movie charm, unpolished and yet sincere. Fear came from the mechanics and isolation, the game being a haunted house simulator, or I guess a biological weapon house simulator, driven by resource scarcity. The PS1 version's narrative is straightforward. A rescue mission gone wrong that reveals corporate evil is told like a 90s horror comic or cheesy 80s zombie or slasher film. Is loud, campy, and occasionally absurd. Yet, overall, its simplicity worked very well. It made the game approachable, iconic, and perfectly in tune with the era's expectations. In essence, the 1996 original invented a template for survival horror. It was raw, experimental, and at times truly creepy, even through some of its clumsiness. And at its core, it created a formula of you are alone and underprepared that came to define much of the genre. By contrast, Resident Evil Remake transforms that rough framework and B-movie cheese into a more psychological and gothic sort of horror. Those same limitations that define the tension in the original game are still there, but now with a fair bit more unpredictability and a far more oppressive atmosphere. Prison Heads made death itself a risk, ensuring that you could never fully relax in the remake. Lisa Trevor's story infused horror with tragic empathy, giving the maze-like mansion a bit more of a soul, it now becoming a tomb of human suffering. Lisa Trevor becoming the embodiment of Umbrella's cruelty, a child turned monster still searching for her mother. The tone is less pulpy and more overall serious, a bit more somber in places, especially found in the details of the many diaries, photographs, and general environmental detail, which tells a story, generally speaking, of lost humanity, though you could certainly say the same of the original as well. It's just given a bit more focus in the remake. In essence, Resident Evil defined what survival horror is, while the remake largely defined how to properly remake a game. Not just updating the graphics, but reinterpreting the vision, allowing them both to stand on their own 2 feet, and one not replacing the other totally. That's what I think a remake ultimately should do if you're going to spend the time and actually remake a video game. At least, that's what it should be in my mind. Both are a story of human curiosity gone wrong, of corruption born from ambition, one raw and experimental, and the other a bit more refined and tragic. The original's core gameplay, I feel like, is really the true focus. The player's fear being generally practical, running out of ammunition, facing a zombie around the corner, wasting an ink ribbon. It's that fear of being vulnerable and kind of getting yourself stuck in the game, which, funnily enough, is something that many survival horror and other genres would take from in the future. One thing that comes to mind would be roguelikes, where you basically at some point kind of fuck yourself during a run and just ultimately die and have to redo it over again, though that's a much quicker variation of this. Perhaps a better example would be something like that of Fear and Hunger, where that sort of survival horror is put to its absolute extreme, where there's a lot of things you can fuck up and completely fuck up the entire run, essentially making it a lost cause at some point to continue going onward. While the fear in the original Resident Evil is that you can eventually get to that point, admittingly, if you use even a little bit of caution, you should be able to get through it just fine. The game can throw you a bone once in a while, but it's the concept of the whole run being over, of really screwing yourself out of ammo and saves and health items, that I think kind of lingers in the back of any player's mind when they're especially first playing through the game. The remake expands upon this fear by not only having the Crimson Heads sort of representing that, but at a much more dangerous cost. Again, I guess the general fear would be, what if I fuck myself so bad that the entire mansion's just running with these things and it's impossible to get around anywhere? Which I think is key to that basic hit of dopamine when you realize that you've found a way to stop the game from tormenting you so much, solve the puzzle, made progress, or just generally have some better ammunition or tools to better handle the creatures in front of you. Story-wise, in the original, I really do love the story. It's simple, yes, but it's a great foundation for what would become a series of video games that only add more onto the lore of the Umbrella Corporation, the T-Virus, mutations in general, stars, all that good stuff. It stands on its own pretty well in the original, but it wisely holds a lot of its cards to its chest, with there being answers to certain mysteries, but the full mystery and some of the other secrets not being revealed until further sequels down the road. The remake can't really take any credit for that, since the original was the one that started all that. But where the remake can take credit is for its darker story, and I think the emphasis it decided to pull, specifically with innocence being destroyed. It sort of recontextualizing the entire mansion as a mausoleum where the past refuses to die. Lisa obviously being the center point of that, but so too are the Crimson Heads if you think about it, as they can kind of symbolize the past refusing to stay buried in a very real gameplay sense. They are the ghosts of your own violence, the consequences of neglect, should you just leave them there and not deal with them quickly. Perhaps a perfect embodiment of survival horror, and the main difference between the original and the remake. In the original, you feared what was in front of you, and in the remake, you fear what you've left behind. I'm not sure if I've heard anyone ever bring this up. Maybe someone has, I don't know. There's a lot of videos on Resident Evil. But to me, Resident Evil is sort of like a modern Frankenstein story as well. Umbrella's experimentations echo that of Victor Frankenstein's ambitions. The belief that science can master life itself, only to ultimately unleash ultimate ruin upon themselves. But where Shelley's creature sought understanding, in some cases love of any kind, Umbrella's creations, zombies, hunters, and tyrants are stripped of humanity entirely. They seek, instead, some fresh flesh to dine upon. On the whole, though, I love both of these games dearly, and they are both masterpieces in their own rights. Neither invalidates the other. Instead, they coexist as two necessary halves of the same story for both Resident Evil and horror through video games in general. One gave birth to survival horror, while the other gave it immortality. And that is it for this one, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you enjoyed this extensive retrospective on Resident Evil 1. There will be more of these on the way, as well as generally more retrospectives of games and the like in general. Tell me what your thoughts are on both of these games down below, and what other games you'd like to see me cover in this way in the future. I can't promise I'll cover any of them, but hey, if you end up getting a lot of likes on your comment, maybe I'll consider it. With that being said, I want to take this opportunity to thank all my loyal patrons and channel members for their continued support of everything that I do, including all my night eggs and my night owlets, as well as a super special thank you to all my great night owls, including Emil Frosing, Fujoshi Cake, Anon, Somber Devante 06, Hexmaniac Hannah, Dumpster Dumbass 27, Spark Saturn, and Ruger Haver, as well as a super duper special thank you to all of my Arch Owls, including the Daring Daniel Petrie, the Radical Ray Kit Kat, the Fearless Forgotten Ace, the Jolly Jeffrey Robry, and the lovely Leanne Loves Christ. Thank you all so very much. And until next time, this has been Dylan the Night Owl, flying off.